He has written a compilation of about 10 essays. The latest one was From Multiculturalism to Interculturalism. And the one before that was The Moderateness of the Far Right. And another very wonderful essay for a Canadian cultural nationalism. I want to introduce this very gifted writer, and I shall say probably in many ways he's alone in his field as he defends Western civilization amongst his peers as an academic and in fact in Canada in general. Ricardo Duchesne, it is our privilege to have you come forward and give us our presentation this morning.
I want to thank Janice and Tristan for this opportunity. This is not an opportunity you get in academia today. At the same time, I should alert you to the fact that you may hear a paper that may even offend some people in this room. And I will start with the title of my paper. It's Immigrant Multiculturalism and the Destruction of European Canada. What is multiculturalism? Canada is known as the most successful model of a multicultural nation. Yet most of the individuals who praise Canada fail to draw a basic distinction between a multicultural society and a society in which multiculturalism is the official ideology of the state. Many societies in the world are multicultural, but only Western societies are under the spell of multiculturalism. The term multicultural should not be confused with the term multiculturalism. Multi means many, and so multicultural means many cultures. From a strictly dictionary point of view, the term multicultural is not politically contentious. It may be correctly used to describe the presence of many cultures in the world. The term may also be used in a normative way to acknowledge, validate, or invalidate the ethno-cultural diversity of the peoples of the earth. The word may also be used to describe the actual presence of two or more cultures and linguistic groups inside one nation or inside one empire. The Austro-Hungarian Empire of the modern era, for example, was multi-ethnic and multicultural, populated by a wide variety of ethnic groups, and so was the Soviet Union. Canada, too, may be correctly described as a multicultural nation during the course of its history before the introduction of multiculturalism in 1971. Examining the Canadian Census of Ethnic Origin in 1971, we find the following ethnic distribution. Aboriginal, 1.3%, British, 44.6%, French, 28.7%, German, 6.1%, Italian, 3.4%, Ukrainian, 2.7%, Asian, 1.3%. The members of all these ethnic groups enjoy equal rights as citizens before official multiculturalism. But the term multiculturalism, with an ism, should be differentiated from the term multicultural. Multiculturalism is best defined as an ideology. By ideology, I mean a set of ideas formulated into a program for the purpose of transforming an existing state of affairs into a new reality that conforms to the ideology. Multiculturalism in this sense is not a descriptive term referring to the presence of multiple cultures in a given society. It is not even a normative assessment of an existing state of affairs. It is rather a political or social program intended to create a new cultural reality. The term multicultural was used to describe certain societies before the ideology of multiculturalism came into common usage. The ideology of multiculturalism only came into general usage in Canada in the 1970s and after. Why? This brings me to a second defining component contained in the term multiculturalism, namely that multiculturalism developed as a program together with the decision on the part of Western liberal elites to open their borders to mass immigration from the non-Western world. Up until the 1960s, the settler nations of Canada, Australia, and the United States were protected by white immigration policies. The principal motivation behind these policies was the collective desire of these nations to remain British and/or European in ethnicity and institutions. It is worth emphasizing that these nations were multicultural, both in the diversity of European settlers and in the existence of a small proportion of non-Europeans. Then the American President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Immigration Act of 1965, which ended the exclusion of non-European immigrants, and 2 years later, Canada adopted the Immigration Regulations of 1967, which also imposed a non-racial set of admission criteria for immigrants. And 6 years later, the White Australia policy came to an end. The result was a tremendous surge in immigration from non-European countries into these three countries in the decades that followed. The adoption of multiculturalism has to be seen in this context, that is, in relation to the decision on the part of Western nations to promote mass immigration from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. As late as the 1970s, the United States, Australia, and Canada were overwhelmingly European in ethnicity. Canada was 95% European in 1971. When Prime Minister Trudeau said in 1971 that multiculturalism was a more accurate description of Canada's ethnic character, he was not thinking of Canada as it was ethnically at the time, but of Canada as it was to become with the rejection of its European heritage and the adoption of mass immigration from the rest of the world. The adoption of multiculturalism in Canada, then, was not about the multicultural state of Canada at the time. It was an ideological program dedicated to the transformation of Canada and eventually all European nations into mere places for all the world's races and cultures. Since Canada, Australia, and the United States were still overwhelmingly European in the 1960s, 70s, the promotion of multiculturalism necessitated the deliberate diversification of the population by increasing the number of immigrants from the Third World. Before 1961, 90% of immigrants into Canada were born in Europe. During the 1970s, the proportion of immigrants originating in Europe was cut by half, whereas the proportion coming from Asia almost quadrupled. Today, roughly 1 out of every 5 people in Canada is a member of a visible minority. Trudeau envisioned multiculturalism, quote, as an experiment of major proportions, end of quote, creating a new Canada that would be a prototype for a new cosmopolitan world order in which ethnic boundaries will no longer matter. Thus far, only European nations are engaged in this experiment. The rest of the world nations are simply watching as Europeans are swamped by immigrants who themselves retain their natural millennial ethnic identities. How is multiculturalism anti-European? Answering this question brings me to a third defining aspect of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is not merely about cultures per se, but about races and cultures combined. More precisely, it is about the promotion of non-European races and cultures inside European nations. It is not a celebration of the rich racial diversity of the world, but an effort to break up the unique diversity of the peoples of European descent within their own homelands. Multiculturalists often refer to the past ethnic diversities of European nations as a way of inferring that our current immigration policies are merely enhancing diversities that were already present in the past. They will point to Britain, for example, as a nation created by Angles, Saxons, Welsh, Celts, and other minorities. They will try to paint a picture of continuity and thus normality in the recent mass arrival into England of Africans, Jamaicans, Pakistanis, Indians, and Chinese immigrants. But there is a fundamental difference, and they know it. The past diversity of Britain was established over the course of many centuries among groups that were all European. These groups were slowly integrated into the British nation, in the course of which they came to experience similar cultural and religious events. Multiculturalism was never about these groups, but about the opening of British borders to non-European immigrants. Multiculturalism is an ideology dedicated to the transformation of Western nations into multiracial states against the historic European peoples. In origins and objectives, multiculturalism is racially anti-European. Multiculturalism is also culturally anti-European. It promulgates the equality of all cultures. Accordingly, it demands in principle a Canada in which no particular culture has a privileged position in the nation's history and future objectives. However, we know that all the institutions, values, religions, and languages of Canada have been overwhelmingly British and French. But in so much as multiculturalism calls for the equal celebration of the cultures of immigrants, there is a powerful tendency at work, mandated in our educational institutions, to portray the Anglo-French founders as merely one group among other founding peoples. Newcomers are now coming mostly from Asia. Therefore, Canadians are expected, in the name of cultural equality, to redefine their roots of citizenship, to reflect this new reality. In a 2002 publication released by Citizenship and Immigration Canada, for new immigrants, it was announced that Canada is a land of many cultures and many peoples. Through Canada's history, millions of immigrants have helped to build this country. At best, multiculturalism wants the English and the French to see themselves as peoples representing no more than a set of procedural laws and institutional templates, a market economy, equality under the law, democratic representation, which belong to everyone. At worst, it wants them to apologize for their employment of a white supremacist ideology as a nation-building tool, their imposition of the Chinese head tax, their anti-Asian immigration laws, and their continued presence or continued existence as the historically dominant majority. On the other hand, multiculturalism protects the group rights of immigrants and portrays them as members of authentic traditions that can enhance our otherwise impersonal and automated Western ways. Trudeau said as much, quote, "Ethnic pluralism can help us overcome or prevent the homogenization and depersonalization of mass society. Vibrant ethnic groups can give Canadians of the second, third, and subsequent generations a feeling that they are connected with tradition and with human experience in various parts of the world and different periods of time," end of quote. While the majority European culture of Canada is portrayed as a neutralized sphere consisting of modern conveniences intended in principle to serve anyone regardless of cultural background, minority ethnic groups are celebrated for their authentic customs and their ability to enrich an otherwise monolithic and culturally dull European Canada. The Europeans are mere possessors of individual rights, whereas every other ethnic group enjoys both individual and group rights. The claim that Canada is a land of immigrants is a lie repeated so often that even educated individuals and mainstream politicians have come to believe it. Canada became an immigrant nation only after multiculturalism was introduced in 1971 and its borders were opened to the third world. Before the introduction of non-European immigration and multiculturalism, Canada was not an immigrant nation, but a European nation created by pioneers and a traditional population with a high fertility rate. And I have some numbers on fertility rates, but essentially they amount to the fact that our population was sustained up until the 1960s, 70s by the domestic fertility rate. It was not immigrants that sustained Canada. Concluding thoughts. The ideology of immigrant multiculturalism assumes that Western nations must forgo their European identity if they are to fulfill their liberal ideals. The historical reality that our liberal democratic values were engendered only by nations overwhelmingly European in ethnicity is conveniently overlooked. There is no historical example of a multiracial state or indeed of a non-European state with original liberal institutions. This emphasis on individual rights as the sole value of Western nations, and so I agree with some of the statements that were made that conservatism is all about individual rights. I think that's one component, but there's a lot more to it. This emphasis on individual rights as the sole value of Western nations has nurtured the illusion that Westerners can break away from their own history ethnicity, and religious ancestry. We think that our liberal values belong to humanity and can be cultivated throughout the world and among immigrants from all over the world. If only we create multiracial societies in which everyone can be an individual with equal rights. But there is a double standard in this way of thinking. We don't expect Japan, South Korea, or Mexico, or any non-Western nation in the world to practice immigrant multiculturalism. We understand their wish to remain different, to protect their particular traditions, but when Europeans object to immigrant multiculturalism in their own homelands, they are accused of xenophobia and intolerance. What Westerners need to realize is that liberal democratic values are uniquely an invention of Europeans, and that these values cannot be so easily extended to the world or assimilated by immigrants. Immigrant multiculturalism would eventually destroy these values as Europeans are reduced to a minority in their own homelands, undergo miscegenation, and miss their ethnic identity forever, to become mere products of the mass media without any cohesive traditions, memories, and histories holding them together as a people with their own destiny. Canada's European identity will soon be destroyed altogether if we don't fight back the cultural Marxists who impose the despotic ideology of immigrant multiculturalism throughout every institution in Canada.